Alright, guys, so the end of the world might be around the corner, and this is your emergency broadcast, and we must talk about the Middle East. So, we are seeing escalation after escalation. Israel, they entered Lebanon, Nasrallah was taken out, and now Iran has launched their missiles. Now, what happened today was frightening. Iran has fired a missile barrage at Israel in reprisals over the recent actions. And what do you know? Netanyahu has vowed to retaliate. Now, we have said many times before, the Middle East is one big powder keg in a burning room. And once we enter an escalation loop, it's just a matter of time before Iran jumps into the fray. We can see that the missiles were fired well over Iraqi airspace and went as far as Tel Aviv. So they can rain destruction down and pound their targets very far away. They have the capacity to do so. And this means they can easily target any asset they want in the Middle East. The problem now is further escalations. Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, has vowed ironclad support for Israel. Biden has also pledged to defend Israel no matter what, and these are nothing new. But what's disturbing are the words coming out of Sullivan, because he has promised payback for the strikes. Listen to this development because something big is coming down the line.
This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case.
And we have to talk about these consequences because there are only two paths left for the US. Doing nothing is unthinkable. They have pumped thousands of troops into the Middle East, we know that. So that's the option of military escalation. However, this will just lead to a wider war. It will be a direct confrontation with the Iranians. But more likely, it's going to involve even more sanctions and financial maneuvering around Iran. Now, JD Vance in his debate just made it clear that money to Iran is going to be a big target. It's really important we pay attention to this because huge economic punishments could be coming.
Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies and, God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well.
Now, I want to highlight that the US can always retaliate against Iran directly, but this will just ignite a regional war. And if that happens, whatever diplomatic faith, goodwill the Middle East has left of the US will be drained away. What's interesting is how Iran didn't give the US any advance warning of the attack. Instead, Tehran gave the US a serious warning after firing the missiles after the fact. The Iranians allegedly gave Russia notice of the coming strikes, so it kinda tells you the gloves are slowly coming off. This shows a total breakdown of communications between Iran and the West, and it really pushes us towards a game theory scenario. Each side doesn't know what will happen next, and the temptation to escalate first goes through the roof. Almost immediately after the strike, oil prices went up from under $67 to nearly $72 in just a few hours, and that's like a 6 to 7% increase, and it doesn't happen unless the world is set on fire. Oil demand globally is already slowing down. US GDP was revised down and Europe is stagnating. Even China had to pump in stimulus money. The fact that oil flew up tells us that the fear now lies with the supply side. The former Israeli Prime Minister went on CNN and he's urging for strikes to retaliate hard, not just on Iran's nuclear program, but on the energy infrastructure as well, and that includes oil wells, refineries, and the entire industry.
I just want to be precise, Prime Minister. You want Israeli airstrikes to blow up Iran's nuclear facilities and its energy facilities, all the oil wells and the oil-related industry that is the main part of the Iranian economy.
That's correct.
So really understand this possibility. Even if the US decides not to sanction Iranian oil, Israel could always retaliate there. We could have even more missile strikes destroying energy facilities. And this move will affect the entire economy. Let's recall who is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. It's China. Iran accounts for 3% of global oil output, and almost all of their exports flows to China. So you'll have a decrease in both production and cheap energy to Beijing. Not only will this piss off the Chinese, it drives up the cost of production of global goods. Inflation will rebound at a time when the Federal Reserve is cutting rates down. And that's why we have US stocks dropping and the price of gold flying to the moon. Everyone is sweating and the regional war is now very, very real. So we have another inflation crisis building. It's like Groundhog Day all over again. We keep bouncing from disaster to disaster. Even if Israel doesn't retaliate, which I find it hard to believe, Iran can also twist their own screws. Let's not forget where they are located. Iran is just next door to the Strait of Hormuz. 30% of the world's oil trade flows through there. Imagine what the Iranians could do. We might have a blockade of oil supply flowing to the west in retaliation. Then we'll see energy prices in the G7, especially Europe, fly to the moon. That will crush their industries even further. The house is really burning down now, guys, and we're at the edge of a cliff. US diplomacy has failed, and by pledging consequences, they have to do something. If Biden, Sullivan, Harris, they do nothing, they will just look weak when election is just next month. And let's head to the doomsday chart from Bloomberg, because we are nearing the final and the last scenario of this escalation. Direct war between Israel and Iran. If the US or Israel retaliates, we could most definitely have wider unrest in the Middle East. If Iran's oil supply gets cut off, if it spreads to key producers like Saudi Arabia, oil will break past 120 really easily. Inflation will climb by another 1.2%, with global GDP collapsing by 1%. The rate cuts will suddenly stop. Western economies, especially those in the EU, will crash into recession. The S&P drop yesterday was just a preview. We might see the mother of all crashes if things explode even further. On the topic of the collapse and the end of the world, we must talk about the big port shutdown happening in the east coast of the US. And this is all about the longshoremen demanding higher pay. It's a pushback against automation in US ports. This strike is massive. It involves over 45,000 workers refusing to work until they get a pay hike. And here's how serious things are. The entire East Coast is down. Almost 100 million tons of goods can't be moved into or out of eastern United States. This is a complete lockdown and the dock workers aren't playing around. The entire eastern supply chain is collapsing.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's going to happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are.
The issue here is the economic damage. We know the US economy is propped up by a ton of deficit spending. The longer the strike continues, the bigger the financial costs. The port strikes could cost the economy well over $4 billion a day. So if the strikes last a week, it's well over $30 billion in broken supply chains. And once businesses start shutting down, the Fed's real nightmare will come true. Massive layoffs across the US will erupt and this will be a national emergency. It's good to remind everyone of US dependency on imports because the manufacturing base is more or less gone. The economy is powered by goods made in Asia, especially China. And that's just the blunt truth. If cheap goods can't come in, this will trigger yet another inflation crisis. And this goes beyond just banana imports. Most prices across the country will go up and there's no other way to say this. Just look at the scale of disruption. 75% of US dairy and egg imports will be affected. So expect groceries to heat up if this persists. Manufacturing inputs like tin and copper are also hammered. Over 60% of copper and 85% of tin face a supply crisis. And this will trickle down to US manufacturers. This will cause the prices of everything from food packaging to vehicles to go up. The strikes will also hammer the EU economy as well. Let's not get it twisted. Let's not forget where cars from Volkswagen are being sold. The US is a big market for ICE vehicles. Now, even getting them off a boat into the warehouse is a problem now. And this tells you how important supply chains really are. It's not just the factories or the roads, ports are essential assets. And the US has lost control of the entire East Coast. So just sit back and imagine a trade war with China. Ports around the world could get weaponized as well. A year ago, the Washington Post came out with a shocking piece. It shows global supply chains around the world have a strong Chinese presence. China has acquired a global network of strategic ports, and these are ports that Beijing has a big stake in them and thus some control as well. And they span across key regions including South America and Africa. We are talking about over 100 locations in 50 countries. If we do get into a global trade war, things could get ugly really fast. China can always defend their own trade routes and even deny US merchant vessels entry or impose higher tariffs. Now, 10 years ago, this would be unthinkable, but it's now a possibility should things get nasty enough. Just look back over the last 3 to 4 years, what has happened then. But let's circle back to the Middle East situation because things are developing very fast. By the time this video goes live, everything could escalate even further. Firstly, Netanyahu has affirmed that Iran has made a mistake and they will pay for it. He has vowed to retaliate. The question is, where will this retaliation come? We have analysts saying that Iran's economy could be the next target. The retaliation strikes could land on Iran's oil production network, and that's over 20% of their GDP. If that happens, global oil markets will be left scrambling. At that point, even the West would want Russia to pump more oil, and that in turn would send Putin's revenue soaring to the moon. In other words, the global economy is so interconnected that everyone's screwed. There's a reason why gold prices are at record highs. It's not because the world is at peace, everything's hunky-dory, but the exact opposite. So we are really in no man's land here. Massive escalation in the Middle East and the threat of nuclear Armageddon in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And it's really time to prepare our bunkers and our tinfoil hats. This roller coaster is about to take one big nasty dive down. But let me know what you think. Is Iran's oil fields in danger? And will the US port strikes get even worse? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.